Hello, 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 everyone. Hello, YouTubers. This is Anonymous T. Hope you're having an amazing day today. So today, finally, I can do this Janet Jackson documentary part 1 review. This is going to cover the first couple of hours that aired on night 1. On last Friday night, where basically it's telling you since 2017, Janet has been with the film crew and basically has been documenting her life for the past 5 years. And so we go back to the beginning of where it all starts. And I want to say, as you know, just kind of as a beginning point, I feel like this was my favorite part compared to like part 2 in terms of just the cohesiveness of everything, how everything started. We kind of got to see certain rumors and things that were debunked, or that certain assumptions people had that turned out not to be true. So I really appreciated the time that was really put into this particular part of starting from the beginning, starting at Gary, Indiana. The breakdown, like how emotional Janet Jackson was for seeing the mural of her brothers for the first time, and how all of the brothers but Michael Jackson was looking in a different direction, and they just kind of stopped the vehicle and everything else. Janet's brother Randy Jackson was pretty much there for everything. Also mentioned that 2300 Jackson Street was always the name of the street and just wasn't something that just happened. She said that she's been in Gary since the age of 8, and they went over the house, which is 670 square feet, and they had 9 kids and 2 parents all in that house. So they were walking around the house and, you know, identifying who slept where, because sometimes some of them slept in the bedroom, some slept on the couch, and different things of that nature. Also, they also asked Catherine about the house, their mother, and she was describing how small the home was. And then they kind of just took us through a little bit of everything, Then, for some reason, Randy told a story that Marlon and Michael used to pee on him. And I feel like this might be a story that Janet might have heard before, but I don't know why he wanted to say it for the cameras. That is interesting for me, but we'll see. Also, I found it interesting that Janet Jackson's mother worked at Sears. So I found that pretty interesting. And then, of course, Joe Jackson worked at the Still Mill. And, where they lived in Gary, Indiana, had a very high capita of murders and gangs and this and that. And pretty much one of Joe Jackson's principles was trying to instill into his children, not to get caught up with the gang life, not to get caught up in doing drugs, not to get caught up in doing, any illegal activity or murderous activity and things of that nature. And so I felt as though, specifically in this part, that they really made it a point to humanize Joe Jackson. And it's like, we've heard different things over the years in terms of what the different children have said as it pertains to Joe Jackson and some of his disciplinary ways and all of that stuff. So it was very nice and refreshing to kind of hear a different perspective than what we've commonly been told or has been said in interviews by some of the other children and things of that nature, to kind of humanize, what morals, values, and principles that the Jackson family were brought up on. So for that, I really appreciated that. And, Janet made it a point to say that they really weren't getting into any kind of trouble. They made it a point, to speak to the times back then of, what we were dealing with in the world. And even Al Sharpton had said a few things. And then they did some old reference clips to, the variety show and everything that the whole family did as a whole. And one thing I did also appreciate for the sake of this documentary was the preservation of a lot of the never before seen footage of Janet Jackson, her brothers, her parents, and everything else, because we always see kind of the same pictures, the same footage of everything else when we see some of these different specials or different reenactments that people do. But for them to preserve a lot of never before seen, whether it was 8 tracks or what have you, of the family, of some of their get togethers and, them practicing and doing different things, I felt it was very rewarding as a Jackson fan overall. Just being a fan of the family, being a fan of Jackson 5, being a fan of Michael Jackson, being a fan of Janet Jackson, of course, like just having those memories and things, it just kind of brings everything back, and it really just kind of takes you back to where it all began, where it all started, and everything else. So then it was pretty interesting that they said kind of how this music thing happened was Joe Jackson had a guitar that I guess he would hide in a certain location. However, Tito Jackson would sneak out and play it all the time. And it essentially was Catherine was the one who saw the talent, who knew her children were talented, but it was Joe Jackson that actually implemented everything to get things in motion so that they could be in front of the right people to, obviously get a record deal and audition for different places and so forth. So, but yeah, really the main thing was, while Catherine was the main one to see the talent, Joe was the one who was able to share the talent with the world. And so ultimately they ended up auditioning for Berry Gordy. Catherine Jackson made the costumes. We got to see some amazing unseen concert footage, which I was so grateful for. And it was just incredible. It was really incredible to see, the early performances because, of course, when Janet was little, she's seeing her brothers on tour. She's seeing her brothers, doing all these performances and, auditioning and trying to, get into the entertainment industry and all of that. And to then be there, at these different concerts and events and so forth. So it was just really nice. Like I said, the talk about Joe was, pretty nice. Reby was very much involved in this documentary, which I was very grateful and appreciative of. Her and Tito were the main siblings that were a part of this documentary. So, and of course Randy, but in terms of the interview sections, it was primarily Reby and Tito who were hands-on into this documentary, and a little bit of Catherine Jackson. So then also, they really were kind-hearted, wanted to protect, obviously their father and his legacy and everything else. He didn't want his kids to, be in jail or end up murdered or all of that stuff. So that part, where he gets kind of that strictness and that discipline and everything else from was part of that he instilled in his children in terms of, hey, you guys are going to be doing something, but you're not going to be out here on the streets and doing, what people are doing in this type of neighborhood. So he really wanted to instill in them, certain principles, certain morals, certain values, certain standards as a family. And so then they moved finally to LA in 1971. So, and they would have like parties and things of that nature all the time. And all of the who's who, in Motown and the entertainment industry and so forth. And I wasn't sure why Randy Jackson had mentioned a David Bowie story about him allegedly offering him and Michael Jackson drugs. Like, I was very confused as to why that was being mentioned. But he mentioned it in the documentary. So, it is what it is. But basically they wanted to make it a point to say, hey, they had a lot of parties. They had a good time. It's a totally different world from the Midwest, from Gary, Indiana. And, but this also came with some racism. This also came with some issues because they were the first Black family to live here in California. They were called the N-word. Janet Jackson was saying how she was in school, how people would rub her skin and ask if her skin, if it came off, and why is her skin like that, playing with her hair, like just all of the things that, you know, if you're black, you already know how it goes in terms of people questioning, you know, what you are, or calling you the N-word, or you know, different things. So it was just a lot. But I think it triggered different people in different ways, because we all have a story of, you know, something along those lines where, you know, people are trying to figure out, okay, are you mixed? What is your hair? Is this real? Or trying to do different stuff. So it was just really wild. And then we got some clips of, you know, what was going on during the civil rights movement, and, you know, kind of what the music landscape was back then, prior to the Jackson 5 coming into orbit, and how, you know, once the civil rights movement started to be in place and different things were integrated now, and music was what was bringing white people and black people together, essentially, that people just wanted to feel good during the times and what they were dealing with. So, and then the cool thing was we got to see a video of the actual audition that took place for the Jackson 5. So that was pretty cool. Of that, like, I really enjoyed that. Them auditioning at Hitsville in Detroit, Michigan. I don't know if you guys been there. It's really cool. It's like a museum now, but it's really nice. And it was just very cool, because I kind of like remember, like, now, like, seeing it back then, but like just seeing the room, I remember it like distinctly, even though it's been some years since I've been there to Hitsville. But exactly when they showed that footage, I was like, oh, I know exactly where that is. So that was pretty cool. Also, when they moved to LA, they had a studio in the house so that they could work on music and this and that. And so it was a lot of back and forth. It was like they were showing kind of the Jackson 5 and their performances, and the never before seen performances or concert footage or different angles. But then they would kind of backtrack to, you know, what was actually going on as Janet Jackson was growing up. So, we would go back, and then we would discuss kind of, you know, to take back to when Tito was secretly playing with, you know, his father's guitar, and, you know, how everybody kind of start to get involved, you know, with the family and practicing. And, you know, Joe is really strict in terms of them making sure they were practicing all the time. And when he was away at work, Catherine would let them sneak out and play outside for a little bit. And then, you know, she would be on the lookout for whenever she sees his car approaching for him to come home from work. And she would quickly like tell him to hurry up and get back inside and pretend like they've been practicing all day. So I found that to be funny and interesting as well. Also, they had different allowances. So they played this interview where they were talking about, you know, what happens if there is somebody's late or somebody needs disciplined in the group to continue to, you know, be on point with the practicing and everything else. And so then that was when they said, oh, they might do something like cut down Michael's allowance or something. And it was just like, whoa, like it was just kind of deep, because it, you know, really showed at the end of the day, these still were kids who were working, who were giving up, you know, their childhood, a typical childhood that you would normally have. And they're traveling around the world at such a young age, meeting all kinds of people, meeting all kinds of fans, and, you know, having to perform every night or every other night, however often the tours were, and just how much of their normal life they really gave up to entertain us and to share with us their talent. And it's just one heck of a sacrifice, just watching all of this back from the beginning and how much they've impacted everything. So that really just kind of spoke to me when I was watching that. So I really enjoyed that. Also, you know, Janet was, you know, saying how she was close and to her, you know, to a couple of her brothers, and it was kind of like her, Randy, and Michael were like super close. And then once they started to, you know, started to get bigger and the Jackson 5 started to blow up and this and that, she started to miss her brother. She started to miss Michael and everything else because they used to talk all the time. And, but then they kind of got, huge. And so then it went to Las Vegas. And Janet was about 7 years old at the time. And they had basically a Vegas show, Vegas residency before it was like a thing for all these people now. And it's kind of comes full circle because Janet Jackson just recently did a Vegas residency, prior to the pandemic. And it kind of just comes full circle that's like where she first started with her brothers and, her other siblings and whatnot. But then it came back full circle for her to have a residency of her own. So it kind of was just a full circle moment, just kind of seeing Vegas back then and everything else and what Vegas has turned into now and all of that. So, they said they were making, the Jacksons were making $100,000 a week, which is insane for that particular amount in time. So $100,000 a week, they were working, they had a good time, and that was that. And so, Janet was saying how, her and Michael and, they like to sneak out and try to, see what was going on in Vegas. They would like to, sneak into different shows. And that was when they would see the performances of the typical Vegas show, the ones where they had the ones where everybody's wearing like all the big feathers and all of the big costumes. But then there were certain ones where they were topless. And that was like ones that Janet and her brothers would like sneak into and everything else. So it was just wild. But, they were always rebels. They were always trying to see, what else was going on. And so then they also, really spoke back to their father that when they were younger at the time, they didn't understand his discipline and why he really instilled so much in them. Like they weren't seeing the vision that he had for the kids until when they actually got that superstardom, then it kind of all started to come together in terms of what he wanted for his children and what he saw in his children and why he was strict the way that he was. And so then it was really nice because, once Janet and her brother are leaving the Jackson home, word obviously got out. I'm sure they saw that there were tons of cameras and all this and that who were there. That Janet was there. Like, I'm sure they saw the film crew, because I think there was like 3 film crews. I'm sure they saw the big SUVs. I'm sure they're like, okay, this is a small town in Gary, Indiana. I wonder who could be here. Like, I wonder what they're filming. So, of course, everybody told their neighbors, and they, of course, saw that it was at the Jackson house, and they all came over. So, I mean, it's like, how obvious can you be? But it was cute. It was a cute moment. So, then the question was asked how, Janet got involved into singing, and pretty much her father told her she was going to sing. And so she said what ended up happening was she was just playing around and like mumbling something in the studio that they had in California. And she was just like playing with something, and it like I guess she left the tape in and was supposed to either take the tape out or delete it or something. And, Joe ended up hearing it and told her that she was going to sing. And so, Janet, which I found very interesting, was she actually wanted to be a lawyer. She actually wanted to go to college at Pepperdine, and she actually wanted to be a business lawyer. So I found that pretty interesting, but I'm like, even still now, it's never too late to pursue your passion or pursue your education. So that's still something that Janet Jackson, definitely can do if she wants to. So, but that's really cool. I had no idea that she was interested in business law. So that was pretty cool. Then they kind of do, our flashbacks still of the Jackson 5 and of course Michael. They show us some footage of the different parties that they had in California. So it's kind of like a back and forth. It's like we're moving chronologically, but then we're still kind of going back with some of the footage, was kind of how the documentary was going. Like sometimes so that was like the thing, like, but it looked like their house in Encino was like super nice. And it kind of reminded me of, how well that they depicted, their Encino mansion in the Jacksons' American Dream, movie that they did back in the day. Like I think it's like over 30 years ago now, that docu-series came out. So that was pretty nice. But yeah, they had all of the who's who that was there in Encino, all of the celebrities, everything. So, and then Janet said again that these parties, her and Michael would try to sneak out. They would try to just kind of be away and doing their own thing, that they're not the ones necessarily who needs to be up under all the celebs or doing all of the entertainment and all this and that. So then Janet said that she did not like her first album, because you'll have to remember at the time of kind of what was going on, and that was, I think at that point, the her brothers had fired their father, so he pretty much had invested his time as a manager, really dealing with Janet Jackson. So his priority was trying to make Janet Jackson the star. But the issue that she had was he made all the decisions. So she would do a photo shoot, for example, for her album cover, and Joe is picking out, okay, well, I like this picture for the album cover. And Janet didn't like that. And then Janet was saying she didn't like necessarily the music that she was putting out, but she really had no say in, what her sound was. It was just basically Joe. It was writers, producers, and everybody else, and engineers just telling her what to do, telling her what to sing, but it wasn't songs that she liked or enjoyed or wanted to sing. So she just felt like that whole time it was, really her father's vision, her father's idea, but Janet had no input in terms of what she actually wanted to do. So that was where, she felt a certain type of way about that. And you could just see it in her eyes, like at some of the old footage back when she was working on, those earlier albums, you could just see it on her face, how she just like was sad and was upset and everything else. So, and then it kind of comes back and forth. It then shows Janet Jackson, and this is why, again, I have to speak to, the never before seen footage. We see all of the kids, they're watching the Jackson 5, do rehearsals, because they have like their own setup at this Encino mansion. You see Janet kind of sitting there kicking and this and that. You see her with her brothers. You see the whole family down there watching their brothers practice for different performances. And so it was just really nice. And then it was interesting because Janet said, she really felt like she was an outcast, that she really felt like she was, once her brother started to go on tour, once, they were gone for long periods of time, once they got bigger, that she kind of felt like she was on her own, that she was on her own little island, and, she was trying to find her own escape. So once she got older, and once her father told her that she was going to be singing and he was in charge of her album and in charge of everything, she had no say, she had no authority to say or do anything. And so that was when she started to kind of rebel on her own and started to seek a different type of companionship. And that's when in comes James DeBarge when she's 16 years old. So, one question that I had, I was very surprised not to see Jermaine Jackson and not to see LaToya Jackson. I thought we were going to see a few more Jacksons a part of this documentary in terms of them giving interviews of what it was like back then until now to give their perspectives. So I found that interesting that the only time they showed the other siblings was when they were referencing maybe a specific story or it was back at that particular time when they may have had a soundbite for an interview. But as far as being a part of the actual documentary and having like current scenes and current things filmed of what their thoughts were, that was nowhere to be found. That was only exclusive to Reby Jackson and only exclusive to Tito Jackson and of course Randy Jackson. So that was pretty interesting. So, because I was like, I literally had wrote that down. I was like, where's Jermaine Jackson? Where's LaToya Jackson? Like, why is this happening? And so, and then it was like the first time I had thought about it was when Janet was talking about how her and James DeBarge came to be, because she said that James DeBarge's brother had liked her sister LaToya. So I'm thinking it might have been Bobby DeBarge. I'm guessing it's Bobby DeBarge. I'm thinking off of the top of my head, it might have been that one, Bobby DeBarge, who had the crush on LaToya, which then of course meant that Janet would be around James. So Janet was feeling trapped at this point, and she had to sneak out basically to kind of hang out with James or sneak around with him. But then it got to the point where, the families obviously were comfortable with him to where he would start coming to their family events and things of that nature. And there were things that they had in common in terms of both of them being from a big family, and then both of them, all having superstardom in their family, and everybody had talent and this and that. However, I didn't like the shade that they were throwing about them being arrested and them having issues with drugs. Like, I felt like that, I was like, okay, come on, you guys, like, can we at least, like, give them a little bit of, give them a little more than that. I mean, this is a talented family. Like, let's not do that. So it was just wild. But, it was weird because Janet said she felt the only way out was to get married. And I found that very profound, that it wasn't necessarily she was getting married to be in love, but that she was getting married to get away, to get out of, the control that she felt from her father, of him controlling everything that was happening at that particular time once he had decided that she was going to sing. So that was very profound for me, because she talked about how the wedding went and what took place, and, how there technically even wasn't, some nice proposal or anything like that. How James had put the ring on the wrong finger, that they basically eloped to some church, and, it was just wild. And so then she threw some shade and was like, I'm attracted to people that I tend to be attracted to guys that use drugs. And I was like, okay, who are we shading? Because there's obviously rumors that her ex-husband, Renee Elizondo, had an issue with, being addicted to drugs and things of that nature. Specifically, like, think it was opioids or what have you. But then, of course, Bobby Brown had his story that he did. And he kind of alluded to, him and Janet having some type of thing. But I was wondering if she was trying to throw shade at Bobby Brown too, because he obviously famously has had issues with drugs and alcohol as well. So I also felt that she was not only shaming James DeBarge, but also shading her ex-husband Renee Elizondo as well as Bobby Brown. And so then we got to see more scenes of Janet Jackson, how she was a part of the variety show with her brothers, seeing everybody act. Katherine Jackson, I don't know how she was making these costumes and doing all these things. More power to her for all these kids, like more power to her. So then we go and transition into Janet's acting career. So it's like we go back and forth. We go back and forth a lot. We go back and forth in terms of the role that Janet Jackson had on Good Times. And we go then into, Janet Jackson being on Fame. And how, then they insert Debbie Allen and, Debbie Allen's take on Janet Jackson, how she was like really quiet and this and that. And, then Janet really started to speak to how this marriage with James DeBarge like really affected everything in terms of, because ended up happening is their wedding night when they got married, Janet's waiting for James and he goes out and he's gone for several hours, but he basically is going out to get high. And so that was the sort of issue that she was dealing with, being with somebody who had, issues with drugs. So it was a lot. And so then we kind of backtracked. So that was the one thing. I liked the back and forth, but then at certain points, there were times where it was confusing because I was like, okay, we were starting off chronologically and we were getting to a certain point, but then we have to go back, right? So then we have to go back to when you did Good Times, and then we have to go back to when you did this. So it was very interesting. So, but then they interviewed different people that were affiliated, of course, with Good Times. And then some of the famous scenes that Janet Jackson had as Penny. And you can just, looking back on it now, you could just really see the amount of talent that Janet Jackson had as a performer, as an actress. And I felt as though when I was going back and seeing those old Good Time scenes, I was like, man, we need a separate documentary. We need 5 separate documentaries for Janet's life just alone. We need a separate documentary for just the music. We need a separate documentary for all of the iconic performances and touring. We need a separate documentary for all of the things that Janet Jackson did as it pertained to acting. We need, a 4th separate documentary regarding all of these secret studio sessions that were recorded that we had never seen before, that we never heard of before, because they always try to downplay Janet Jackson as a songwriter and try to make it seem like it was all Jimmy's Jam and Terry Lewis. But, we got to see throughout the documentary that Janet Jackson did have a hand in doing a lot of the songwriting as well, because this is her life that she's telling. And she tells a lot of her life in music. And then we would also need a separate documentary for just her love life alone. But even with this documentary, after watching both parts, there were still a lot of things that Janet held back about her personal life. And I was left with questions about her timeline and all this and that. Because I was like, well, wait a minute. You admitted in interviews that you were with this dude and you had a thing with this guy and this and that. And then there's this picture of you and this other person. But it was just wild. Overall. So, then we circle back to Fame and how the stress of, dealing with James DeBarge and the issues that he was having with substance abuse was affecting her. Was, she would show up late to work sometimes. Sometimes James was supposed to be the person to pick her up, and she would just be waiting for hours and hours and hours on end for him. Then there would be times that they would be arguing over the pills, because he was addicted to, different things. And Janet was sick of him being on, high all the time and having all of these issues. It was just really emotional, you could tell, for Janet. Just kind of reliving back certain things, certain pain, or certain things that she had, and certain things that she still even now feels a certain type of way about, that you could feel as though it happened yesterday. And so that was really profound as well, that I felt I really felt with her, we were kind of going through it with her as she was kind of speaking to all of this as it was happening. So that was also another takeaway as well. And so then we get to the point where everybody wants to talk about. So, because of course, Janet explains how things kind of ended with her and James. And I guess they had another, type of one of their last drives together where she was taking James back to his brother's house. And she said that, she just got to a point where she just knew she was done, that she just knew that this was it. This was over. And, basically told him, that they were done and this and that. And then she quickly locked the doors after he got out the car and, basically had to end up, getting the marriage annulled. So, that was pretty interesting. And then also, Reby was saying in her interview as well that, they still wanted her to be a part of the family business and work and do everything else like everybody else was doing. And so, yeah, she was like, well, I want to get married and start a family and do my own thing. I don't want to be a part of the spotlight. So Reby was like, deuces. So it was just funny, but I think it was to the point. That's what people saw. People saw that the only way out of Joe Jackson was to go get married or to fire him as your manager or to do something. So that was just, kind of how Reby was able to just completely get out and never look back. However, Centipede is my jam. Shout out to Centipede. It is before my time, but is the jam. And I was thinking about it the whole time that Reby Jackson was doing her interviews. I was like, Centipede. And of course, that is all Michael Jackson, of course, who wrote it and produced and everything else. And you can hear in the background vocals. And then they start to show, they start to filter in some of Janet Jackson's old performances from those earlier albums. And you could just tell, like, now looking back on her face and her emotions of how unhappy she was. And we didn't know, of course, back then, but we just thought maybe she's a little shy or, this and that. But really, she was going through it because she hated what suggestions and ideas that Joe Jackson had and how much control that he had over everything. So that I felt was very interesting. And so then we get to the good stuff. We get to the alleged baby rumors. And so this, of course, was when, by the time, things are already over with Janet and James DeBarge, then these rumors come out that Janet Jackson had a baby, that there was a secret baby. Then people found out about her marriage and all this and that. And so then they show like the different news articles. They show that, the questions, the headlines, whether or not, if the baby was raised by her sister, Reby Jackson. And then I found it interesting that they had spent time showing a couple of Janet Jackson's nieces who actually favored Janet Jackson a lot. And I was like, well, what are they trying to say with these nieces? Are they trying, like, I understand that Janet was speaking to the rumors of who they thought out of, all of the kids and all the offspring that maybe Janet Jackson could be their mom. But the other side of it is the DeBarge family played into this too. They've said it, for several years, even dating back to a few years ago, even dating back to the reality show Growing Up Hip Hop. It's still been a thing for them, to also entertain these rumors and allege that there's a secret baby. So it's not just the media. Definitely on the DeBarge side too. They've definitely fed into this. And there's definitely been a few people who they've tried to say over the years could be Janet Jackson's daughter. And so Janet was just basically saying, how could she keep a child away from James? And so then all Reby Jackson had to say was that it was hurtful. And so I was confused because I was like, well, what does that mean? Like, it was like, I guess people are taking it as there was a denial, but I still had further questions because I felt like we really didn't get to the meat of what was happening. I felt like we kind of just did a skirt. Like, I felt like they spent more time on the headlines about the rumored baby than they did actually discussing the rumored baby. So that's why I kind of left and I'm like, okay, well, what am I supposed to take away from this segment? Because even though there technically was a denial, there technically also wasn't, they were still kind of vague about certain things. And why do we spend so much time showing up these other pictures of Janet's nieces who look like her? But where are we going with this? What are we trying to say? Like, why wasn't it just a flat out no, that this is not true? This is not happening. I do not have another child. Like, I don't know. I just felt like there was something there. Because even though she's saying she would never keep a child from their father, we also have to consider the fact of what she was dealing with back then. And we also have to consider the fact that back then, when you're a female and you're in this entertainment industry, they want you to lie. They want you to lie about your age. They want you to lie about being single. They want you to lie about all the stuff so that, you appear like a single woman, so that you're desirable to your male fan base, so females are looking up to you with this independence and everything else. So there's just a lot that comes with it. And people, Janet Jackson, of course, even up until now, she famously, goes back and forth with her weight fluctuations. And so then it was funny because they basically kind of moved on from the segment where Reby Jackson basically just says, well, and as it pertained to the baby rumors, she's like, well, I always see my siblings in the headlines in the tabloids. And then they, of course, show the tabloids of all of the crazy and wild things that they've said about Michael Jackson. But I'm like, is this how we're really ending the same segment? Like, I just felt like there was more there with the baby. I'm not sure if you guys felt the same way or not, but I kind of felt like there was, something there. Because already people didn't know that Janet Jackson and James DeBarge were secretly married, but it sounded like everything kind of just exploded once they found out it was annulled, and then here come the baby rumors. So, I don't know. I felt for me, it wasn't answered the way that I felt there was enough closure for me to have. So, but I'm not sure if any of you guys felt that same way or not. But I felt that there was more. So, I don't know. I still feel like it might just be one of those urban legends that we're just never going to get, the real answer. So I don't know. But so then also we started to see Janet Jackson speak about Michael Jackson a little bit differently in terms of how close they were, but how their relationship changed. She kept alluding to different forces and different people who had a negative influence on her brother that changed the closeness of their relationship. Because you got to keep in mind, she already said that they lost some closeness with the Jackson 5 always being on tour and how they became huge superstars. They were larger than life. So they went from, Janet and Michael talking all the time, being super close, to then now she's not seeing him as often. He's, catapulting into another level of success. And, then we're kind of circling back. So we are circling back to now Michael Jackson. There's no more Jackson 5. Michael Jackson, he's taken off as a solo artist. He's larger than life. And Janet then is referencing, she feels that pretty much once Thriller happened, that Thriller was when Janet Jackson, started to notice a difference in Michael Jackson and how he treated her. And then she also started to notice as well, that was when, the tabloids and the media tried to make her brother to be to look like a freak, to look weird and had all these allegations. And so I found that interesting because I'm not sure if Janet Jackson is trying to call out Sony or who she is really trying to speak to that she feels had the most negative influence on Michael Jackson. Like, was it his team? Was it a particular person? Like, what was it that you felt that there was just so much of a change in your dynamics of your relationship? So I am very curious to that as well. So, so then one thing that Janet Jackson, was speaking to, because they're all talking about, her, Reby Jackson, everybody, they're talking about how everything was under a microscope and everything else. Oh, one last thing about the baby rumor I forgot. So Janet had said the reason that she was gaining weight during Fame around the time when she was with James DeBarge, because they only lasted a year of marriage, she said that she was on a birth control that was causing her to gain weight, was causing her weight to fluctuate at the time, and that she wasn't pregnant. So that was what she was saying was the reason for the weight gain. That was just a sidebar. But so that was that. Then, they just spoke to how much, that Jackson last name just really had them under a microscope for everything that they did, was being scrutinized. Everything that they did or didn't do, even if it was something that wasn't true, it still ended up in the tabloids because that's just, what was happening. And I kind of felt as though now looking back at everything and looking back at everything that the Jacksons as a whole have sacrificed, it felt as though once Michael Jackson reached the level of success of Thriller, it seemed as though there was an attempt, there was a push to take down this Black family. That this Black family was way too successful and we need to do something to take them down a peg to make people look at them negatively. That was kind of what I was thinking in the back of my mind, that nobody has ever amounted to the success that Michael Jackson's Thriller. Nobody has had the success that the Jackson family has had as a whole of all of this, because they were doing residencies before even the Osmonds were doing residencies. Like this, that's how much, things that they have transcended for so many artists, white and Black artists, to be able to do all these Vegas shows, to just all of the different influences that they've had on pop culture for the last several decades. And it just seemed as though once Michael Jackson reached a certain level of success, because Janet keeps referencing Thriller being kind of when things took a turn, is when they wanted to knock this family down, is when they wanted to see, okay, what allegations can we make up about this family to try to hurt them, to try to take them down a peg because they're too successful. And that was when I started to just really hurt, for Janet and for her family and for everything else, because it's like, why can't we be in a society where you are successful on your own merit and you don't have to be taken down because they don't want to see you at a certain level of success because of the color of your skin? Like, why do we have to go down that road and have that stigma that, oh, you can't be at this level, you can't be too close to where we're at, or we're gonna have to do something about it and knock you down a peg or two. Like, that's when I started to feel a certain type of way, and I started to feel triggered because I'm like, this happens so much in real life, in everyday life, with so many people who can kind of relate to that, not at the capacity at the level of the Jackson family, but in different ways. And so that was just really interesting as well. So yeah. And then Janet, also wanted to speak to how, certain things she was naive about in her relationships, and just kind of the innocence she had of just trying to be the person to try to always help and do so much for others. But then it gets to a point where you start to see the toll and the negative impact that it has on yourself, to where Janet, and it might be a Taurus thing because Janet's a Taurus, and it might just be a thing, okay, I've done all that I can do, but if this isn't going to work, this isn't going to work. And I've got to keep it moving. So I found that to be profound. And then she kept speaking to, one of the producers in terms of when she would speak to certain things, there were certain things that were just too painful for her to discuss, that were too painful for her to really get into and dive in deep about, and all of that. So yeah. That was pretty interesting. So then one thing that Janet Jackson said that I also was very intrigued about was one of the principles that Michael Jackson had in terms of being successful. And really, in all honesty, you guys can apply this, and even myself, you can apply this to really any aspect of your life when you think about it. Whatever you want to do, Michael Jackson said the following. Janet said that he said, always practice, never give up, have self-confidence if you want to make it. So let me say that again. From the late, great Michael Jackson. Always practice, never give up, have self-confidence if you want to make it. So I thought that was wise, and it just really speaks to, the genius of Michael Jackson. People think that, it takes rocket science to become anything that you want to be. And really, it doesn't. Really, you have to have the it factor, but also implement those particular principles in whatever it is that you want to do, whatever it is that you are passionate about and have dreams about, and so forth. So that is just something that I'm going to take with me, is just, again, one of many gems from the late great Michael Jackson. So another thing was they wanted to do another album for Janet. And Janet, after all of the stress that she was dealing with from her father being her manager all this time, and, him having control over everything, her not having a say in what type of music she wanted to do, her not having a say in any of the type of clothes she wanted to wear, how she wanted to be styled, like any of the stuff, like it was all her father's vision, him choosing what photographers and what photos to have for the album cover. She was just over it. So she said that if she is going to pursue music, and if this is going to be successful, she needs to do something different. She needs to take a completely different approach to this next album, or she's gonna, feel as though this whole music thing was just a waste of time for her. Like that's how disgusted she was, with her father and the decisions that he was making. So she ended up firing her father. She wanted to get out of the contract with her father, being in charge, being her manager, and this and that. So, then Joe Jackson basically says, since Janet was his only, client at this point, this is it. This is the end of the business in terms of him being a manager for his kids, because, the Jacksons already fired him. The Jackson 5 already fired him, and now his daughter's firing him. And so, but Janet had this lead assistant, her first assistant to this day, by the name of Davenport, who he told to stay with Janet. And I found that to be very interesting, that even though he might feel a certain way about being fired, by his daughter, that he still is going to make sure that she has the best with her. So that was pretty good. But everybody was saying, they said that, Janet, she stood up to her father. Janet was tough. And so Janet had called Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis from the time. And so what happened was, Janet and her mother went to a Morris Day in the Time concert, and I think, were sitting in the front row or something of that nature. And Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, they were talking about how, like, they do this thing where they grab themselves at the end of the show, and they saw Janet and her mom, and they weren't sure whether or not they were going to do it, but then they said, since they were just being ignorant anyways, they just decided to do it. And then they met backstage, and then they were talking, they were getting, to know each other, and this and that. And so then that's when they had the idea that they wanted to produce Janet Jackson. So then they start work on the Control album. And this is what I love. This is like where it was like at the peak for me, was, again, like I had said earlier, they make it seem as though Janet Jackson doesn't do any songwriting, that she has no influence, that it was all Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. But we got to see Janet be a part of the process. We got to see her be a part of, in the recording process, of things that she liked or that she didn't like, and this and that. We got to see a lot of the behind the scenes. And then one thing I noticed, I was telling my father about, actually, I said, did you notice in one of their behind the scenes recordings, there was a Cherelle poster that was sitting against the glass? I don't know if it was a Cherelle album or a Cherelle poster, but you have to recall, back then, Cherelle and Alexander O'Neal, Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, were working with them and producing hits for them. So, but it was like you could see kind of a corner of it over the glass in the recording session that they were having. And so it's like if you blinked, you missed it. But I thought it was pretty cool. So, they're showing the behind the scenes and kind of different things they're talking about. And so Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, they're saying how they were shocked that Janet basically told them that she had no say in nothing. She had no say in what type of music she wanted to do. She had no say in any of the process. So they really, use that to really nourish that and, really put together something great for Janet to tell her own story in her own words, and, with some great production and writing and everything else that's all going to come together. So we just see a little bit of everything. They show, Donnie Simpson's video Soul when we're premiering the Control video, because I think nobody knew what was going to happen, with this next phase. Like, was Janet done with music after, what happened with her earlier work? So then they start off with the Control video, and they're showing all the records it broke, all the millions that it sold, all the awards that it won, and it was just everything, because it really just, how many hit singles were off the album, and how it just completely exploded and overtook everything. And so then, again, like I've referenced with Janet's personal life, they make it seem as though Janet goes from her and James DeBarge immediately to Renee, but I don't know if I necessarily buy that. But essentially with Renee, he had videotaped so much stuff. So much of his entire time with Janet Jackson, and by extension, her family. So he says that he met Janet, or they kind of, came to be in their initial interactions. I guess they were saying that it was Michael, it was LaToya, and I think their parents lived together at a house, and they were either doing construction on it or building it or something. And that was when he first used to be around Michael and Janet Jackson, because he was there to, be a videographer and, document different things. So he ended up, they said that he documented the next 10 years of Janet's life. And keep in mind, he didn't do any interviews or anything like that. He, wasn't a part of the documentary in terms of present state. So I'm wondering if that's due to, any NDAs or anything like that. But yeah. Also, it showed behind the scenes of when they would go on vacation, when they would spend time together on the beach, and then Janet had the behind the scenes of when Renee proposed to her, and then she'd reference back to James, how James really never had to propose to her. It was kind of hey, let's just get married, and it was just a different approach in this initial relationship with Renee, but they started out for a long time just being good friends. So there's that. So then it features, as they're working on this Control album that's breaking all these records, guess who they have be the choreographer? It's Miss Paula Abdul. Oh my gosh. It is just hilarious how everything has come full circle. Especially with Paula Abdul's, prior relationship anyways in the Jackson family. And now she is teaching Janet Jackson the moves and everything else. So, but people just underestimate how iconic Paula Abdul is. Sidebar, I've met both of them. Both Paula Abdul and Janet Jackson. They are the sweetest, most humble people ever. But they're incredible. But it was just a nice little throwback of, seeing some behind the scenes sessions of, recording Janet Jackson doing practice and this and that. So it was really fun. And then it was a point for Janet Jackson's biographer to try to say that she really wanted, for Janet Jackson to escape out of Michael Jackson's shadow. And that there was a lot of pressure in the follow-up to the Control album to be successful and, really get involved in the creative process of everything. So, but it was a lot going on, because with the success of Control, Janet's now catapulted to another level of success. So now the recording sessions with Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis are not the same as the recording sessions of, what they were doing for the Control album. Now there is a different energy. Because Janet now, she's big time. She's breaking all these records. She's winning all these awards. She's doing all this stuff. So Renee is documenting these sessions. He is documenting these sessions where, Janet Jackson and Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis are getting into it. And they told him to stop recording, to take the camera off or whatever, So he does something to where maybe you don't see like the red light recording, but it still really is recording, and then leaves the room to pretend like he's disappeared, but really on the low, he's still actually recording. So that's when I was like, man, this is kind of shady. Like, if they told you to leave and they told you to stop recording, why are you still recording on the low? So that I felt a certain type of way about. Like, if people said stop, just stop. Like, why do all this extra? So, but yeah, Renee was just he was just doing the most, like getting all this footage and everything else. Like, I'm grateful for the footage, but I'm not grateful in terms of how some of it came to be, because still it was the expense of feeling like that borderline, okay, are we exploiting the Jackson family, or are you genuinely trying to document? Like that, I felt like we were towing the line depending on the situation. Just keeping it a buck with you guys, keeping it a buck. So there was that. So they had, by the time they really started to get in the thick of these arguments with Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, they were about 4 or 5 songs into the Rhythm Nation album. And so, they're like, we don't need this attitude and this and that. And, Janet Jackson felt that she did not have enough songs to tour because she still hasn't toured yet. You would think she would just go out and tour after, the success of the Control album, but she still hasn't been on tour. So this is incredible because technically Janet Jackson's never been an opening act for anybody. She was the act. So that was cool. But yeah, it just seemed like it could have really went left, and we could have missed out on the greatness of what is now the Rhythm Nation album. The iconic Rhythm Nation album. But it definitely was not, it was not all rainbows and flowers during that recording process, but you got to realize Janet's at a different level at that point. So there's going to be some diva moments. There's going to be some moments where it's like, hey, I don't want to do it this way. Or, hey, this isn't what I'm feeling. Or, hey, we need to do it like this. And then there were times when Janet was singing in the booth and she saw them laughing. And she's like, okay, well, what were you guys laughing about? Was this take good? Was it not good? Like, what's up? What's tea? So yeah, it was just very, 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 very interesting. Very, very, very interesting. And so then what ended up happening was Janet went on Michael Jackson's 1998 Bad Tour. She went to one of his tour dates. I want to say she went to one of them that was overseas. And so it wasn't necessarily like an insecurity or like this competition of having to feel like she needs to be like Michael Jackson or, do something extravagant as Michael Jackson. It was more so about how she saw the process, how she saw how detail-oriented Michael Jackson was, and seeing the dedication that Michael Jackson had to his craft. Just seeing all of the different pieces that were coming together and everything else. So that was really interesting, and she said once she saw that, I think that was kind of what gave Janet the juice of seeing the greatness of Michael Jackson's Bad Tour, seeing all of the work and everything else that was put into it, and then ended up, putting the all and having the wherewithal to hurry up and finish this Rhythm Nation album and put on the best first tour ever for herself. So, but yeah, again, in the documentary, they were saying, I believe it was her biographer basically saying, hey, Janet never wanted to be Michael Jackson. So, but it was interesting because Janet said that they were talking about the Rhythm Nation tour because they finally got the album done. They finally felt as though there were enough songs to tour on. And they said that the first show, there was only like 3 people clapping. And so Janet was maybe thinking, okay, maybe this is a flop. Maybe this isn't a good look. Maybe we should just stop it. And so then after that, the next date, they see this line as Janet is driving up to the arena And she's like, who is that? Who are they all there for? And it's like, they're there for you. They're there for you, sis. And then it was like, then it kind of hit the magnitude, because she's seen things like that, you know, for her brothers, of, you know, the worldwide, you know, fandom, people waiting in line for hours to see you, and the, you know, passion and love and the standing that they have for you. And for this to now see it, you know, for Janet, she just felt like really happy, really amazing about it, felt really humbled and grateful. And you could tell that it just really impacted her, and it just gave her that push that, you know, what she is doing is incredible. She's making history. She's doing it. And I didn't know this information, that Janet Jackson had the biggest debut tour in history. And she didn't have to be an opening act. So it's just incredible of how, you know, everything's kind of came together. So very, 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 very interesting. Some of the behind the scenes about the Rhythm Nation tour. And so then we start to get into like the next part, where we're getting some commentary from Regina King. We're getting some commentary from Samuel Jackson and Q-Tip and this and that. So there's more to come, as well as Janet Jackson, you know, getting a star on the Walk of Fame. So that is it in a nutshell of what happened in part 1 of this documentary. Because then we start off the next part with Poetic Justice. So let me know your guys' thoughts. What did you guys think of the first part of the documentary? Did you enjoy it? What did you like? What did you dislike? What did you want more of? What did you want less of? What did you guys think of it? I am curious to know your thoughts. Like I said, I loved the behind the scenes footage that we got, not only from the Jackson family as they were younger, also some of the unseen concert footage, but I really felt the cherry on top was the recording sessions. Seeing those recording sessions that were documented, so that we could really see how the process was working with Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, and how certain things came together. I would have loved a special just on that alone. Like I said, Janet Jackson needs 5 separate documentaries, and I already told you what they were. She needs 5 separate documentaries. One on her love life, one on her acting life, one on her iconic performances, one on, you know, just the music. And and like there's just so many that you could do. And but yeah, it's just everything. The performances, the acting, the singing, the creative process, and her personal life. Iconic performances, like you could just go on and on and on. Like, it's legendary. It is a legendary and iconic career. It truly is. And then I found it interesting in one of the behind the scenes videos that Renee was calling Janet Jackson the nickname that Michael Jackson used to call her. And I was like, man, I'm like, this guy is like really, really immersing himself. But yeah, let me know what you guys think for real. This will of course be included in the Janet Jackson documentary playlist, so you guys can check out my other thoughts on some of the other things happening in the documentary. And I will also be following up with the part 2 documentary and what my thoughts were on some of that as well. Please do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the notification button so you're notified the moment I post new content on my channel. And with that being said, I will talk to you guys again very soon.